Welcome to Go-to-Market Navigator by FinCapital, our ongoing series where we break down the essential components of nailing the right go-to-market strategy. Today, I'm joined by Chris Chen, former CRO of various fintech companies and now GTM advisor. Hope you enjoy the conversation. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Tell us about your sales experience.
Yeah, so I've been running revenue teams close to 20 years now, and last few roles have been CRO. So I've had the pleasure of running sales teams. I kind of had to take on more responsibility over time. And it's almost always been in B2B enterprise SaaS kind of upmarket in regulated industries, fintech, insurtech, and healthcare with long sales cycles. So there's just a lot of things that you have to do to help the buyer to make decisions along the way in order to kind of minimize that sales cycle time. And almost all the products I've sold have been technical in nature. So like data, APIs, AI, ML. So it's account manager, customer success, there's onboarding, solutions engineering, rev ops, and even pieces of customer service have reported to me or marketing. So I've had the pleasure and also I've gone all the way through IPO in public, but I
That was
generally
my next
in
question.
kind of the Series A through Series C is usually where I enter. So I'm still seeing a lot of the product market fit maturing, as well as the building out of the revenue team and kind of what each team is supposed to do along that journey.
On that point, as you know, companies are reaching product market fit, the org is maturing. At what point should folks start thinking about account expansion?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think generally when I see it most happen is around that late Series A, early Series B trigger. But that being said, there are other couple things that I think tend to either accelerate it or decelerate it. I think in industries with really long sales cycles like healthcare or insurance or banking, I see people invest in it earlier because the sales cycles take 12 to 18 months at times. You really need your existing accounts to expand in order to hit your revenue targets and to take some pressure off of the sales team. If you're introducing new products pretty frequently, you really do need to think about expansion and a cross-sell, upsell cycle. I've also seen companies underprice their service pretty significantly at the beginning for obvious reasons. And then you need to somehow be able to upright the pricing over time. And so then you need a bunch of things to happen for the customer expansion to happen as well. So, and then finally, I think the obvious one is there's a tipping point in the math where you have enough customers where account expansion is actually going to be a bigger number for that year than the new bookings will be. So I think, yeah, late Series A, early Series B is a common area, but I would flex that depending on, some of those factors. And there's more that I probably haven't thought about.
And as we're digging into account expansion, let's talk about upsell and cross-sell a little bit and what you've seen, because you've touched various different parts of the software stack. So,
Yeah, you might ask this later, but I think it's important to kind of start with like what's the difference between an expansion, in my mind at least, the way I define
Mhm.
it, versus what a cross-sell upsell is. To me, an expansion is within the framework of the existing contract. That's a very technical definition, but what I mean by that is most enterprise SaaS, particularly like enterprise upmarket SaaS, right? You'll have some sort of minimum and some sort of transactional usage or per seat component that drives additional revenue above and beyond that. To me, that's expansion. Your job as a customer success person in that role is to drive as much expansion or higher volume within the structure of the contract so the company collects more money over time. So that's pretty obvious, right? Where it comes outside of the structure of the contract for me, which means that it needs an amendment or something that needs to be edited, which is pricing changes. They need professional services. You have a new product to sell. A completely different department in the bank now wants to use your product and
Mhm.
wasn't inside of the structure of the contract, or you're going to do territorial expansion where I'm a payments company. I'm in the US now, but I'm going to Canada. All of that will trigger for me a cross-sell upsell. And so you're gonna have two different playbooks. There's kind of a more of like an operational playbook of driving product growth and like kind of just natural led expansion, which a customer success person should do. But in a more mature company, you might bring in a salesperson or a specialist to do the cross-sell upsell on the introduction of a new product. And so that's the reason why it's important to kind of have the distinction that there are two different motions possible inside of account management.
As you're training your AEs, what's the most prudent way to go about introducing the conversation around account expansion to your end clients?
Yeah. Oh, so when you mean expansion, like a new product or yeah. So this is complicated. So I'm gonna kind of wax poetic or pontificate here a little bit. Account management or customer success, however, whatever term you want to use. I'm old enough to have seen both.
Before it was a thing.
Yeah, before it was a thing. In 2011, customer success became much more of a buzzword. Um, and and now you're going to hear stuff like customer experience or customer journey. So I'm going to
Yes.
start there. And the reason why this is important is just imagine I don't date any longer. I'm married, happily married. But back in dating, imagine like asking the person to get married on the first date. That would be very awkward. It doesn't make sense. You have to lay a lot of groundwork in the relationship for you to ask for something that is going to cost them. There's a huge opportunity to cost them. And so most of your accounts, by the time you need to ask them for money, have time on the books with you. They've onboarded, they've integrated, they've expanded, they've either had a good experience or they haven't. And that's what I mean by the customer experience, which is if you go in and ask for money too soon, it's going to be a very bad conversation. Even a renewal, if you haven't done the right things, are going to be difficult. So for me, the account manager, the customer success manager is really the quarterback of it all. They are the R of the RACI, if you're familiar with the RACI framework,
Yeah.
the responsible party. But everyone else in the company needs to help the customer. They might be accountable, they might be consulted, they might be informed, but a ton of stuff ends up influencing that experience, that journey for the customer, where if you haven't done the right things, it's hard to ask for more money. So I think foundationally is, does your company know what it takes to make a customer successful first, right? Successful, quote unquote, because I think it's a little bit different for every single company. If you've defined that journey and you've done a good job, and you've also measured metrics that actually matter to the customer. I think this is the thing that people skip early on and is like, oh, I did an amazing job. I answered all their customer service tickets and they're not mad at me anymore. The problem is there might be a budget decision maker above your daily operating user who's like, I have no idea what value you've brought to me this
Mhm.
year. Well, again, that's hard. So there's like a sequence of gates and a playbook, let's call it, that you introduce to the experience. So that way, when it's time to ask for money, you've proven already all of the things that they need to do in order to make a buying decision. Then you send in an account expansion person, and that's now a sales cycle in my mind. But that's the reason why I think we talk too much about CSAT, like right, customer satisfaction. That is important. But for me, what's the most important is if you have an annual operating plan, which I always encourage strategic account managers to do, is like at the beginning of the year, sit down with all your key accounts and be like, what are we accomplishing this year? How are we measuring it? And if we do that, are you happy? Like these are your outputs and goals, right? You have to put out fires, but if you hit those, it's a lot easier to have that upsell conversation at the right time because you like it's like, all right, well, we literally agreed on this, we did it. So now what, right? And so you can have a much better conversation. So key is you can't just be reactive to everything. It's not all about putting out fires, which I see in younger companies. It is about taking the reins, owning your destiny, having a really tough conversation with your partners at times, and then managing through the process of that experience to get them a place where they're ready to buy.
So much to unpack. So as we're thinking about the structure of the team, what would you say are kind of best in class ratios in terms of customer success team members versus account executives and those who are responsible for quota and direct sales? And also, what do you think are the types of skills that those type of individuals need to be successful? And the last question is, how are you measuring success for them? Like, what should their KPIs be? That is one of the things that many of our portfolio companies come to us about is helping them figure out exactly how they should compensate and measure success for customer success teams because it's a very new function within their sales and revenue orgs, right? So lots to unpack in that particular question, but curious what your take is.
Let me take a shot at this, and let me start with the metrics and also kind of stray it by stage. So to go back to 2011, I think customer success became in a way that I understand why we moved away from the word account management. I think account management was just too much like all we care about is renewals and revenue. We don't care about the customer experience or the journey. They both matter, right? I think if you do it right, you are making your customers feel like they're getting value from the product and the service, and you're able to drive revenue growth. I think they both absolutely matter. So I think it's kind of a marriage of the two. It's just kind of like, how do we say a word that makes sense for both? That being said, I think early on, which makes sense, is when new bookings are the most important thing, your sales team is front and center. Really, your customer success team, in my mind, is in phase one, which is, can I just get this person activated with revenue? So, of course, onboarding, integration, activation are going to be the metrics you care about most, right? Is like, can I light up the booked contract and not have them fall out of the funnel? Because integration is a time when you put a sour taste in people's mouth or things can go sideways. And so I feel like it's very appropriate seed to series A. Your metrics should all be about the thing that you care about most, which is, can I prove that I can onboard and put people into an activated mode and actually using the product in a successful way? Then product metrics start to come in: daily active users, monthly active users, how many transactions are they kind of pushing through the system? Um, and I think the next one, the really big one, the kind of the more the OKR level. So there's like KPIs in my mind, which are kind of um, forecastable indicators versus what you really care about, right? Leading indicators versus the actual things, is retention, right? Retention in an early stage, like seed to series A, is the most important thing. You really, in down market companies, like in down market motions where you're selling to a lot of startups and small companies, that may not get above 90%. I've seen a fair amount of churn, but it's not always bad. It's the reason of why they're churning that matters, right? It's like startups go under, that's unfortunate. That's an okay reason for things to go sideways. What you don't want is your ICP people churning out of that. So kind of when you remove the things you cannot control, are you having like a mid 90s% kind of churn rate? I'm sorry, retention rate. Like you really want like low single digit churn, because that means your ICP is strong, your product's working, your service is working, um, and you're priced appropriately. And then you kind of know where you stack up against the competition, right? There's a lot of things that get in there, but it's the churn's only going to tell you what's happening, but you kind of have to dig in as to like why it is. So unfortunately, you keep on building, right? Now it's MRR, ARR. All right, great. They're on book, they're staying. How do I actually drive volume, especially usage in volume in here? And so it's a lot of product-led growth metrics. And like, how are they using it? Where are they seeing friction? But ultimately, are they getting value out of the product? And so below that OKR, this is when Series A companies, I tend to get my account managers or customer success managers to do that annual planning with their customers. You might think they're trying to measure operational efficiency savings. What happens if the budget maker is thinking about revenue? Oops, right? And so I think it's at this stage you really have to start kind of pulling in metrics that they care about and that you can kind of proxy on your side to kind of measure it. And so there almost becomes kind of a joint success in a common vocabulary of like, if you do well, we do well, right? And so then that should, in theory, drive MRR, ARR to some degree as well. And then I think as you get into Series C, Series D, the last thing I would call out is really lifetime value.
Mm-hmm.
If you have measured retention, if you have measured growth and revenue, you should have a decent idea of what your lifetime value is. And that becomes a cost of service and an exercise with your finance team at some point, which is great. We've focused on growth for the first 4 years, but now we actually have to be profitable at some point. What do the unit economics really look like? how do we how do we kind of pull on these dials and levers to make our unit economic model or lifetime value make sense? And then again, you're going to build more KPIs on top of it. So none of this ever goes away, right? It just kind of builds and becomes more sophisticated over time. And I think your focus will shift as you kind of move on over time as well.
How would you think about compensating customer success teams so that they've hit their KPIs, they're aligned with the kind of larger group OKRs? This is a contentious point because oftentimes they're driving a lot of revenue for the company, but aren't necessarily tied to any one particular account earlier on. And so curious how you go about that.
Yeah, so the early stage, if we are going back to what we just talked about, if we're talking about like onboarding and success metrics, a lot of the things I really care about early on is speed is speed. and then how many mistakes are being made, right? Is like, can I get this person integrated as quickly possible? And then when I do retros, how many major mistakes do we make during that onboard
Mhm.
phase? Like what I call P0s, P1s, kind of to borrow the product terminology there. I think it's really important that you pay people for the outcomes that you really want, right? Salespeople are we're very much coin operated, as we've been told in the past. While I think account manager success really is a little bit different, they're more farmers, they're not pure hunters. But I think the base salary should go towards, you know, putting out fires, doing the basics, doing renewals. And as your metrics change, as you go from renewal to maybe expansion to cross sell, upsell, I think that variable component needs to reflect that and needs to that's where I want them to really kind of reach for that extra amount of money by doing the right things. And so the incentives just need to be really aligned. Um, and where while a salesperson is generally 50-50 on OTE base versus their variable, I I think my recommendation is to make the base slightly higher. The OTE may not be the same, just to be very clear, but like 60 to 65, maybe 7% of your comp really comes from your base salary because they're not really hunting. It's not as risky. They're given a book of business. And so I feel like they should put out fires. They should be managing accounts. They should be doing retention. But where I really want the extra amount of your time to focus on is here's a quota. I need this much upsell, cross-sell revenue, and the other 30% with accelerators if they go over. Very similar to, I guess the biggest difference is I think the base is just different, and that's a reflection of the risk of the job that they're doing.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. One question I wanted to dig into specifically with you, because you have been an operator for so long, but now you're very much in this kind of advisory capacity, is what are you seeing in the trenches right now? This is a very different market than you might have operated in a couple years back. And so curious, what are some of the trends that you're seeing or some of the challenges that companies are facing across the spectrum because you're advising companies in different levels of maturity?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, it's hard not to notice that everyone has the word AI
Yeah.
in their company mission or their name now. I think the other thing that this is the first time I've been to fintech meetup. So I've been on the insurance side for a few years now,
Yeah.
and I was shocked by the categories haven't changed, but there are like 2 to 3x the number of competition or competitors in each category now, and they're all kind of doing something roughly the same but yet different. And I think it's really somewhat confusing. So, I think I'm not a VC, but I've been told by some of my smarter VC friends there will be consolidation coming.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, you still have to hit your milestones and your metrics. And I think particularly for those in the B2B enterprise SaaS space where there are long sales cycles and things, it is really learning how to differentiate in that market and how your buyer wants to buy. I think more so than ever, throwing spaghetti at a wall is kind of dangerous when you have this much competition out there. Um, it is really making sure you do the best deals that you possibly can and kind of put yourself in a position of success. So maybe put another way is because there's so much competition out there right now, I think the cream can rise to the top if you really kind of focus your sales and your account management efforts, really build a good customer experience, really build a good journey. Um, you're going to be able to separate yourself from the competition because ultimately, in these regulated industries like fintech, healthcare, and insurance, the best technology actually doesn't always win. In fact,
Yep.
it almost never does. And that means the partner experience you're creating or the client experience you're creating does matter. It's kind of like a Michelin restaurant. Yes, people come for the food, but the experience matters.
Mhm.
So I think there is an opportunity to separate yourselves there while the industry consolidates a little bit.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's a great point. I think selling into large enterprises requires all these different procurement committees and compliance and the like. And so once you're an established vendor, The likelihood is they actually don't want to switch out. And so, as long as the economics are favorable and you've done a good job, for the most part, they want to keep you on as a partner or vendor, right? Which is why customer success teams are so important, right? To be able to reinforce that relationship.
Oh,
Um,
can I comment one thing on AI? Because
yeah,
this is probably more because I do advisory work for seed stage and Series A companies. This is my only advice to the founders who are truly doing AI, right? They're like, I'm kind of removing the people who just put it in their marketing stuff. In regulated industries, I would bite at the edges first, meaning it's very unlikely a bank's going to just introduce AI into their underwriting model. There's so much stuff with the CFPB as well as the regulation, like that's just not happening. Same with an insurance, is like you probably won't get someone to do a black box model AI right anytime soon. However, there's a ton of customer service stuff with LLM and chat that, as long as you're able to do it right within the regulatory and the PII frameworks, there's probably a lot to be done there. So kind of like, where can you drive efficiency and better experience for them, but it's not touching the most sensitive parts that are highly regulated in these industries. And so that's where I'm spending some time with folks of really understanding it's not just like where is the AI valuable? It's more like, where is it even permissible in some of these regulated industries?
100%. Yeah. What are some other questions that you think I didn't touch on that I should touch on?
I'll do a little bit of a thing around the customer experience because I think the word customer experience is kind of like this like pie in the sky thing that we all use this word, and maybe until you've put it into practice, it doesn't quite, you learn a lot actually trying to like actually give reality to it. Um, the reason why the customer experience is really different is like, at the end of the day, a sales playbook isn't that different from a customer, like an account management playbook. However, like we said, the account manager is really just a quarterback. They're like the conductor of the orchestra, but everyone has to play an instrument in order to make the thing sound good. Um, and so the customer experience, unlike the sales playbook is usually encapsulated. It's usually contained within the sales team. Like the sales engineer does this, onboarding does this, the salesperson does this, the SDR does that. Maybe you have to reach out to marketing. It's not the most cross-functional feel for the most part. That's just not true in the customer experience, right? Engineering owns a piece, product owns a piece, ops probably owns a piece. Every part of the company, even legal compliance, right? Like probably owns a piece because of procurement. How do you take what was a four-piece like quartet, whatever string quartet, and now it's a full orchestra? How does everyone know what they're doing at the same exact time, depending on where the customer experience is? And so if you're still in the onboarding phase, that customer needs very different things than someone who's like, I validated, I have ROI, I'm ready to expand. A very different set of players come in at that point. And so I think for CEOs, founders, CROs, whoever's listening to the podcast, this is more importantly, defining the customer experience will not only drive revenue, it is the playbook that actually helps organize your entire company around a customer-centric experience. And that's why it takes a while for you to build one because you may not know what good looks like yet. But as you know what good looks like, as you get them through the journey, document it and make sure everyone knows where they're supposed to play along the journey. That way, all I have to do is like, hey, this person's in stage 3. Here are the criteria or the things that we need to do to get them into the next stage. Product, you're responsible for that, right? There's a RACI, like, you're accountable for this, blah, blah, blah. Just go down the list and everyone will eventually be like, I know how my job connects to the customer, right? You always hear from engineers and product, like, that's great that this deal is live in the sales, in the Salesforce, but I don't know what my impact is like. Now you do. Now you do.
Yeah.
So I think there is kind of like the obvious stuff, like drive revenue, like get them through the stages as quickly as you can. But more importantly, it actually is a connective tissue for the entire company of how to be customer centric, and they understand where they add value.
I love that analogy. Is there any software that you've used before that helps organize a lot of this? Organize and streamline.
I have been trying to I think some of this new AI stuff around, the gongs of the world, I think
Yeah.
they're touching on it. I think they are nibbling at the edges. And I apologize to these companies if they heard there's a couple of enterprise softwares that have been doing this for a while. Um, I don't I don't think I've seen exactly what I just laid out, at least visually yet, but they are starting to nibble at the edges. But it is just such a difficult thing of, right, it just goes from the beginning to end, the entire life cycle of a client, which is, right, you started an onboarding and now you might be buying two, three, four products and kind of going through the cycle constantly throughout, hopefully over 5, 7, 8 years journey with this company. And so that thing is just kind of a living, breathing Bible that, unlike the Bible, just kind of changes over time. So unfortunately, I haven't seen it yet, but there might be other experts out there, people thinking about how to hack this in the right way.
That'll be a call to action. We'll have folks who listened to this video reach out if they know of anything they've been using. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But yes, I do agree. It feels like a lot of things post CRM are very kind of point solutions rather than being a holistic cross-functional platform. So definitely agree with that. Sales engineering is very involved in helping close deals, but I think there's little detail that's discussed around how they actually support account managers and helping retain and expand certain accounts. And so, from your experience, how have you involved your sales engineers in that part of the process, specifically at
Yeah.
the end?
Absolutely. Like if you're too young, I usually just kind of assign them by accounts. Like you'll just kind of round robin them around a little bit, and maybe they're on some sales accounts and some on the account management side. But as you get more mature, I actually feel like right up front, especially if it's like an API or something that requires integration, it's really much more about architecture and integration and getting that architecture right, getting the use cases right. But on the back end, post deployment, you might have a different type of experience that's needed, which is now that we're live, we are going through potential bugs or features that are missing. Like, how do I work with the product team? How do I help evangelize for this customer to get on the roadmap what they need? Or maybe we missed something in the architecture and we have to kind of redo it, right? So there's like a stabilization. So I actually have them reading customer service tickets to monitor like what are the most frequent things that are kind of popping up so they can have conversations with the product team and also educate the sales team on misses and things like that. And ultimately, when they're ready to buy more, when the client's ready for upsell, cross sell, right? Because it's a new product, it might require more work on the customer side. So definitely bring them back in. So if you're doing quarterly meetings like check-ins and kind of checking your OKRs with them, I will have solutions engineers sit in on those calls too, so they know technically the customer is in a good place, right? It's definitely a big box to check, which is if the integration's not working, the product's not working the right way, you might have to go back to the drawing board. And so it's important that they understand what's going on as well.
Yeah,
And maybe it's a shorter way of don't put your account managers on an island. Like
yes,
they need,
yes, 100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate the time. This is a super insightful discussion, and looking forward to sharing this with the rest of our network. Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Thank you for your time.